Vanity Fair, I live an extravagant life and I make no apologies for it. I'm free as a motherfucker.
Video appears to support some of the accusations of abuse against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs.
They're gonna probably be arresting me just because we want to have a good time.
Multiple safes broken into, drawers ripped open, closets ransacked, boxes of gun ammo and Grammy Awards.
Because the judge has just sentenced Sean Diddy Combs to 4 years in prison. He was found guilty over the summer on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution in connection with his ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura and another woman.
You know, it's really going to be hard for me to take more hits than I take it. God forbid, get in front of a jury and have a chance.
Sean Diddy Combs, billionaire, music icon, cultural titan. For decades, he's been untouchable. But behind the champagne toasts and white parties, behind the bad boy empire and the Forbes lists, there was allegedly something else happening. Something darker. Something that preyed specifically on men who had no voice, no platform, and no way to fight back. This isn't about the Cassie lawsuit. This isn't about the federal trafficking charges you've already heard about. This is about the male victims, the ones the media barely talks about, the ones whose stories got buried under headlines about female accusers. And what their allegations reveal is a pattern so calculated, so predatory, that it forces us to ask a disturbing question. What drives a man with everything, money, fame, power, to allegedly drug and assault other men? We're going deep into the psychology, the pattern, and the 5 men whose lawsuits paint a picture of systematic abuse that Hollywood didn't want you to see. We'll examine the forensic evidence, the legal strategies, the cultural silence that allegedly protected a predator for decades, and the uncomfortable truths about male victimization that society still refuses to confront. Stay until the end, because what these cases reveal about power and predation will change how you see the entertainment industry forever. Before we dive into the allegations, we need to understand something fundamental about power and predation, because this isn't just a story about one man's alleged crimes. It's a case study in how wealth and influence can create an environment where abuse thrives in silence. Sean Combs built an empire that redefined hip-hop entrepreneurship. Bad Boy Records launched the careers of Notorious B.I.G., Faith Evans, Mace, and countless others. Sean John Clothing brought hip-hop fashion to mainstream retail. His partnership with Ciroc Vodka revolutionized celebrity alcohol branding. At his peak, Forbes estimated his net worth at nearly $1 billion, making him one of the wealthiest figures in entertainment history. But wealth alone doesn't explain what allegedly happened. We need to understand the ecosystem of power that surrounded Combs. He wasn't just rich, he was a gatekeeper. He could greenlight careers with a phone call. He could blacklist people with a word. He moved in circles where access meant everything, where a connection to Diddy could change your life overnight. This is the environment where, according to multiple lawsuits filed by male victims, abuse allegedly flourished. Not in dark alleys or anonymous spaces, but in luxury hotels, exclusive parties, and private estates where the wealthy and powerful gathered. Now, here's what makes these male victim cases different from what you've heard in the media. While Cassie's lawsuit and the federal charges dominated headlines for months, at least 5 separate men have come forward with civil lawsuits alleging a specific chilling pattern. They were invited to exclusive events under professional or social pretenses, given drinks they didn't know were drugged, and woke up, sometimes hours later, sometimes the next day, realizing they'd been sexually assaulted while incapacitated. The psychology here is crucial, and we'll break it down throughout this investigation. We're not talking about random acts of violence. We're talking about alleged premeditation, planning, a system that, according to these lawsuits, was refined over years, possibly decades. And that system, according to these allegations, targeted men specifically, often men who worked in entertainment, men who were economically vulnerable, men who Combs allegedly knew wouldn't be believed if they spoke out. Because let's confront an uncomfortable truth. Society still struggles to accept male victims of sexual assault. The statistics are staggering. According to the CDC's National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, approximately 1 in 6 men experience sexual abuse or assault in their lifetime. But reporting rates are drastically lower than for female victims. Why? Stigma, shame, the toxic masculinity that tells men they can't be victims, that they should have fought back, that admitting vulnerability makes them less than men. And according to these lawsuits, Combs allegedly exploited that exact vulnerability. He allegedly understood that male victims face barriers female victims don't. The assumption that men always want sexual contact, the questioning of their sexuality, the mockery they'd face if they came forward. If these allegations are true, he weaponized those barriers to create a hunting ground where he could allegedly operate with impunity. December 12, 2024, 3 separate John Doe lawsuits land in New York federal court. 3 different men, 3 different incidents, but the same alleged playbook, executed with disturbing precision. According to The Guardian's detailed reporting on these cases, here's what these 3 men claim happened and why the similarities matter. John Doe number 1 alleges he was invited to what he believed was a networking event at a Manhattan hotel. The details in his complaint paint a picture of calculated deception. He wasn't some random person off the street. He was allegedly someone with connections to the entertainment industry, someone who had reason to believe this was a legitimate professional opportunity. According to his lawsuit, he arrived at the hotel and was welcomed into what appeared to be a small, exclusive gathering. He was offered a drink, not by Combs directly, but by someone else in the room, which is a common tactic in drug-facilitated assault. It creates plausible deniability. Within 30 to 60 minutes, he began experiencing symptoms: disorientation, muscle weakness, difficulty speaking, and inability to control his body despite being conscious. This is consistent with the effects of drugs commonly used in sexual assault: Rohypnol, GHB, or ketamine. These substances don't just sedate victims. They create a state where the person is aware of what's happening but physically unable to resist. It's a waking nightmare, and it's exactly what makes drug-facilitated assault so psychologically devastating. John Doe number 1 alleges that in this incapacitated state, he was sexually assaulted. His lawsuit doesn't provide graphic details. Civil complaints rarely do, but the legal language is clear. He alleges non-consensual sexual contact occurred while he was unable to give consent or physically resist. John Doe number 2 tells a nearly identical story, but at a different Manhattan hotel and on a different date. The pattern is the same: professional or social invitation, exclusive setting, offered drink, rapid onset of incapacitation, assault while unable to consent. What's significant here is the location choice. Manhattan hotels, particularly high-end ones, offer privacy, security, and anonymity. They're spaces where wealthy individuals can come and go without scrutiny. They're also spaces where victims can be isolated, where there are no witnesses, where the power dynamic is completely one-sided. John Doe number 3 claims his assault happened at Combs Hampton's property. This is the same location famous for those legendary white parties, the ones where celebrities like Leonardo DiCaprio, Jay-Z, and Beyoncé were photographed in all white, sipping champagne, embodying luxury and exclusivity. But according to this lawsuit, behind the Instagram perfect facade, something sinister was allegedly happening. John Doe number 3 alleges he was invited to the property under social pretenses, given a drink, and assaulted while incapacitated. The same pattern, just in a different setting. Now here's what's legally and psychologically significant about these 3 lawsuits being filed on the same day. They're filed separately. These men aren't co-plaintiffs. They're not coordinating their legal strategy. According to reporting, they don't even know each other. Yet the alleged pattern is identical: invitation, drug drink, incapacitation, assault. In criminal psychology, this is called an MO, a modus operandi. It's the signature method a predator uses repeatedly because it works, because it's been refined through practice, because it minimizes risk of detection. Serial predators don't change tactics that are successful. They repeat them. If these allegations are true, what we're looking at isn't impulsive behavior. It's not crimes of passion or opportunity. It's calculated, systematic predation, a method that was allegedly developed, tested, and repeated over time. But here's the question that haunts these cases. Why men? Combs had access to anyone. He had wealth, fame, power, connections to models, actresses, musicians. So why allegedly target men specifically? And why use drugs to incapacitate them rather than seeking consensual encounters? The answer, according to forensic psychologists who study powerful predators, lies in control and risk management. This isn't about sexual orientation. It's about domination. It's about having absolute power over someone, rendering them completely helpless, violating them, and knowing they'll likely never speak out because of shame, stigma, and the near certainty they won't be believed. Dr. David Lisak, a clinical psychologist who studied predatory behavior for decades and interviewed hundreds of offenders, has documented how certain predators specifically target victims they believe won't report. His research shows that serial predators are often highly strategic. They assess vulnerability, they test boundaries, they choose victims based on calculated risk assessment. Male victims of male assault face enormous barriers to reporting that female victims don't face to the same degree. There's the societal stigma around male vulnerability. There's the questioning of sexuality, the assumption that if a man was assaulted by another man, he must be gay, or he must have wanted it. There's the toxic masculinity that says real men can't be raped, that they should have fought back, that admitting victimization is shameful. If these allegations are true, Combs allegedly weaponized those exact barriers. He allegedly understood that male victims would face mockery, disbelief, and career consequences if they came forward. He allegedly calculated that the shame and stigma would keep them silent, allowing him to continue the pattern without consequences. While those three anonymous men were allegedly being assaulted at parties, another man was allegedly being forced to facilitate it all. His name is Philip Pines, and his lawsuit, filed in December 2024, pulls back the curtain on what he calls Wild King Nights, a term that sounds celebratory but allegedly describes something far darker. According to People magazine's detailed reporting on Pine's complaint, he claims he worked for Combs from 2019 to 2021, a 2-year period during which he alleges he was made complicit in a system of abuse. His job, according to the lawsuit, wasn't just typical employee duties. He alleges he was required to set up these parties, handle logistics, ensure privacy, and most disturbingly, clean up afterward. Think about what that means. Pines alleges he wasn't just a witness to what happened at these events. He was allegedly made an active participant in the infrastructure that enabled them. He claims he was required to prepare spaces for these gatherings, knowing what would happen there. He alleges he had to ensure the right supplies were available, and we can infer from other lawsuits what those supplies might have included. And afterward, he alleges he had to clean up the evidence, the aftermath of what he describes as sex parties that crossed into sexual battery and trafficking. His lawsuit includes civil claims of sexual battery, sex trafficking, and emotional distress. But here's what makes Pines' allegations particularly significant from a legal standpoint. He's not claiming he was assaulted himself in the same way the John Doe plaintiffs are. He's claiming he was forced to facilitate the assault of others. That makes him a witness to the system, to the operation, to the pattern. In legal terms, this is potentially explosive. If Pines can provide evidence, text messages instructing him to set up events, emails about logistics, financial records showing payments for supplies or services, testimony about specific incidents he witnessed, his lawsuit could corroborate the claims of the anonymous victims. He's the inside man, the one who allegedly saw how the operation worked from beginning to end. But let's talk about the psychological toll of what Pines alleges, because this is where the human cost becomes clear. There's a concept in trauma psychology called moral injury, the deep psychological damage that comes from being forced to participate in or witness acts that violate your core values. It's different from PTSD, though they often occur together. Moral injury was first identified in combat veterans, soldiers who witnessed or participated in acts that violated their moral code and couldn't reconcile those actions with their sense of self. But researchers have since found it in healthcare workers forced to make impossible ethical choices, in first responders who couldn't save everyone, and in employees forced to participate in corporate wrongdoing. According to his lawsuit, Pines experienced moral injury while allegedly being coerced into facilitating sexual abuse. His complaint describes the emotional distress of knowing what was happening, feeling powerless to stop it, and fearing retaliation if he spoke out or refused to participate. And that fear wasn't irrational, because that's the other element of power dynamics that we need to understand. Combs allegedly didn't just have wealth. He had the ability to destroy careers, reputations, livelihoods. He had connections throughout the industry. He had lawyers, publicists, and allegedly people willing to intimidate or silence anyone who threatened his empire. Pines' lawsuit describes being trapped in an impossible situation, continue facilitating abuse and live with the moral injury, or speak out and face potential career destruction, legal retaliation, and possibly physical danger. That's not a choice. That's coercion. The term Wild King Nights itself is significant. It suggests these weren't random occurrences. They were regular events, scheduled gatherings with a specific name. That level of organization suggests systematic operation, not impulsive behavior. It suggests planning, repetition, and a belief that this could continue indefinitely without consequences. If Philip Pines was the employee who set up the parties, Rodney Lil Rod Jones was the producer who allegedly lived through the abuse himself, and critically, he claims he documented everything. Jones filed his lawsuit in February 2024, and it's one of the most detailed, specific, and legally complex complaints in the entire case. According to People magazine and Pitchfork's extensive reporting, Jones worked as a producer and videographer for Combs from approximately September 2022 to November 2023, a 14-month period that he describes as a descent into ongoing harassment, assault, and coercion. Jones wasn't some random person who met Combs at a party. He was a professional brought in to work on legitimate music projects. He had a contract. He had specific job duties. He was there to produce tracks, capture behind-the-scenes footage, and help create content. What he got instead, he alleges, was a year of ongoing sexual harassment, unwanted touching, drugging, and pressure to participate in and facilitate illegal activity. Here's what makes Jones's case different from the others. He claims he documented everything. As a videographer, his job was literally to record what was happening, and according to his lawsuit, he allegedly has footage, audio recordings, and other evidence of the environment he was working in. His complaint describes being subjected to non-consensual sexual conduct, being drugged without his knowledge, and being pressured into facilitating illegal activity as part of his employment. The allegations in Jones's lawsuit are specific and disturbing. He claims Combs made repeated unwanted sexual advances, touched him inappropriately on multiple occasions, and created an environment where refusing these advances would have meant losing his job and potentially being blacklisted from the industry. But Jones didn't just sue for assault. He brought broader enterprise claims, essentially alleging that Bad Boy Records and associated entities were part of a system that enabled this abuse. Think RICO-style allegations, but in civil court. He alleged that this wasn't just Combs acting alone, but a network of people and entities that facilitated, covered up, and benefited from the abuse. Now, here's where the legal process gets important. A judge reviewed Jones's complaint and dismissed some of those broader claims, the enterprise and racketeering-type allegations. Courts are cautious about allowing those kinds of sweeping claims without substantial evidence. But, and this is critical, the judge allowed major claims to proceed, including sexual assault and claims under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. That's a federal law designed to protect victims of sex trafficking. It allows victims to sue their traffickers in civil court and recover damages. The fact that a federal judge allowed those claims to move forward means the court found enough evidence in Jones's complaint to suggest his allegations have legal merit, that there's a plausible case that could succeed at trial. Combs' lawyers have vigorously denied everything, calling Jones's allegations fabricated, exaggerated, and financially motivated. They've argued that Jones is a disgruntled former employee trying to extort money from a wealthy celebrity. This is a standard defense strategy, and it's effective because it shifts focus from the allegations to the accuser's motives. But here's the thing about civil lawsuits. They require evidence. Jones's legal team wouldn't have filed such specific claims without believing they could back them up. Civil litigation involves discovery, a process where both sides must exchange evidence, sit for depositions, and answer questions under oath. If Jones's allegations were completely fabricated, that would become clear during discovery, and his case would collapse. The fact that his case is proceeding suggests his legal team believes they have evidence to support the claims. And remember, Jones was a videographer. If he documented what he alleges, that evidence could be devastating. So what does Jones's lawsuit tell us about the psychology of abuse in professional settings? It reveals how predators allegedly use career opportunities as bait and leverage. Jones wasn't some random partygoer who could walk away. He was a professional brought in to work on legitimate projects. The alleged abuse was woven into his employment, making it harder to escape, harder to report, and harder to separate from his career aspirations. Industrial organizational psychologists who study workplace abuse call this quid pro quo coercion, the implicit or explicit message that your career depends on your compliance. It doesn't require explicit threats. The power dynamic itself creates the coercion. When your boss, who controls your paycheck and your professional future, makes sexual advances, saying no isn't really an option, especially in an industry like entertainment where reputation and connections are everything. Jones alleges he was trapped in exactly this situation: speak out and lose everything he'd worked for, or stay silent and endure ongoing abuse. That's not a choice. That's exploitation of a power differential. The lawsuit also describes Jones being drugged on multiple occasions. This is consistent with the pattern alleged by other victims. The use of substances to incapacitate, to lower resistance, to create situations where consent is impossible. If these allegations are true, it suggests a predator who understood that even with the power differential, some victims might still resist or refuse. Drugs eliminate that possibility entirely. And on February 4, 2025, another lawsuit dropped. This one, reported extensively by Newsweek, came from a male plaintiff identified only as John Doe, a Las Vegas adult entertainer who alleges a multi-year pattern of abuse that goes beyond assault into the realm of blackmail, psychological control, and systematic exploitation. According to the complaint, this man was hired for private entertainment. The lawsuit describes him as someone who worked in Las Vegas's adult entertainment industry, a legal profession, but one that carries social stigma and makes victims particularly vulnerable to exploitation. He alleges he was contacted about a private gig, offered substantial payment, and told it would be a straightforward entertainment job. The lawsuit claims Combs didn't just assault this man, he allegedly recorded it, and then, according to the complaint, he used those recordings as blackmail to force continued compliance over a period of years. The alleged message was clear: if you don't keep coming back, if you don't keep participating, if you try to leave or speak out, these videos go public. Your career is over, your reputation is destroyed, everyone will know. This is where we need to talk about the psychology of entrapment, because what's alleged here is a sophisticated form of psychological imprisonment. Sexual predators who target adults, as opposed to children, often use a specific strategy that researchers call grooming and entrapment. They create compromising situations, document them, and then use that documentation to ensure silence and continued access to the victim. It works like this. The first assault might involve drugs or coercion, but once it's documented, the predator has leverage. They can threaten to release the documentation, knowing the victim will face shame, stigma, and consequences. The victim isn't physically locked up, but they're trapped by fear. Fear of exposure, fear of shame, fear of not being believed, fear of losing everything. And here's the particularly insidious part. Each subsequent assault creates more documentation, which creates more leverage, which makes escape even harder. It's a cycle that tightens over time. And according to this lawsuit, that's allegedly exactly what Combs did. The complaint describes a multi-year pattern, not a single incident, but repeated assaults over an extended period, all allegedly maintained through the threat of releasing recordings. This suggests the victim felt he had no choice but to comply, that the psychological control was so complete that escape seemed impossible. The lawsuit also alleges that bad boy entities facilitated or benefited from this arrangement, suggesting this wasn't just personal misconduct but potentially part of a business operation. This is a serious allegation because it suggests organizational involvement, not just individual actions. Now we have to be clear, this is a civil complaint. These are allegations, not proven facts. Combs has denied all allegations across all lawsuits. But the specificity of the claims, the timeline, the methods, the alleged use of recordings, the description of a multi-year pattern suggests this plaintiff has detailed evidence to support his story. If true, this case represents perhaps the most psychologically damaging form of abuse alleged in any of these lawsuits, because it's not just about the physical assaults, it's about the ongoing psychological torture of being trapped, of knowing you're being exploited, of feeling powerless to escape because the predator holds documentation that could destroy your life. Researchers who study coercive control, a term that's gained recognition in domestic violence contexts, describe how abusers use various tactics to trap victims: isolation, intimidation, threats, and control of resources. What's alleged here fits that pattern perfectly, just in a different context. The alleged use of recordings as blackmail is a form of intimidation and control that kept the victim trapped in an abusive dynamic for years. There's one more case we need to discuss, and while it's legally complicated and ultimately didn't proceed, it's significant for what it suggests about the timeline of alleged abuse. Derek Lee Cardello Smith filed a lawsuit alleging sexual assault at a party in 1997, nearly 3 decades ago, long before most of the other allegations, long before the Now Me Too movement, long before there was any public scrutiny of Combs' behavior. According to Wikipedia's summary of the case, a default judgment was initially entered when Combs didn't appear in court. For those unfamiliar with legal procedure, a default judgment happens when a defendant fails to respond to a lawsuit or appear in court. The plaintiff essentially wins by default, but that judgment was later overturned due to service and statute of limitations issues. Service issues mean there were problems with how Combs was legally notified of the lawsuit. If he wasn't properly served, he can't be held in default. Statute of limitations issues mean too much time had passed between the alleged assault and the filing of the lawsuit. Most states have time limits on when you can file civil claims, and 1997 to whenever this was filed likely exceeded those limits. Here's why this case matters. Even though it didn't proceed on the merits, it suggests the alleged pattern may go back decades. If Cardelo Smith's allegations are true, Combs may have been engaging in this behavior long before the recent wave of lawsuits, long before he reached the peak of his wealth and power. This is significant because it challenges a potential defense narrative. Combs' lawyers could argue that the recent allegations are all part of a coordinated attack that accusers are piling on now that he's vulnerable. But if there's an allegation from 1997, filed years ago before the current wave of accusations, it suggests a pattern that spans decades, not a recent conspiracy. The procedural dismissal also highlights a harsh reality about sexual assault cases. Time is often a predator's best defense. Statutes of limitations exist for legal reasons. Evidence degrades, memories fade, witnesses disappear. But they also mean that older allegations, no matter how credible, may never get their day in court. This creates a perverse incentive for predators. If you can keep victims silent long enough, you become legally untouchable for those crimes. The shame, stigma, and fear that prevent victims from reporting immediately become a shield that protects abusers from accountability. So let's address the question that's been hanging over this entire investigation. Why? Why would a billionaire, a man with access to anything and anyone, allegedly drug and assault other men? What psychological profile fits someone who allegedly commits these acts? The answer isn't simple, but forensic psychology and decades of research on sexual predators give us frameworks to understand it. First, understand this fundamental truth. For certain predators, abuse isn't about sexual gratification. It's about power, control, and domination. Dr. Anna Salter, a psychologist who's interviewed hundreds of convicted sex offenders, found that many describe their crimes in terms of control and domination, not desire or attraction. One offender she interviewed said, "It wasn't about sex, it was about making them powerless. It was about being in complete control." That's the mindset we're potentially dealing with here. If these allegations are true, Combs allegedly wasn't seeking consensual encounters. He was allegedly seeking complete control, rendering victims helpless through drugs, violating them while they couldn't resist, and in some cases, allegedly using recordings to maintain control afterward. That's not about sexual desire, that's about power. There's also a psychological phenomenon that happens to some people who achieve extreme wealth and power. They begin to believe normal rules don't apply to them. Psychologists call it acquired sociopathy. Not a clinical diagnosis, but a pattern where empathy erodes as power increases. Studies by psychologist Dasher Keltner at UC Berkeley have shown that people in positions of extreme power often develop reduced empathy, increased risk-taking, and a sense of invulnerability. They start to see other people as objects to be used, rather than humans with autonomy and rights. There's also research on what's called power paradox, the idea that the qualities that help people gain power, empathy, collaboration, fairness, often erode once they have it. Power changes the brain, literally. It affects how we process information about others, how we assess risk, and how we make moral judgments. If Combs allegedly committed these acts, it may reflect a mindset where he believed his wealth and influence made him untouchable, that he could do whatever he wanted, to whomever he wanted, without consequences. That belief isn't irrational when you've spent decades watching rules bend around you, watching problems disappear with money and lawyers, watching people defer to you because of your power. But why specifically target men? This is where the psychology gets even darker and more calculated. Male victims of male sexual assault face unique barriers that female victims don't face to the same degree. There's societal stigma around male vulnerability. There's the questioning of sexuality, the assumption that if a man was assaulted by another man, he must be gay, or he must have wanted it, or it somehow reflects on his masculinity. There's the toxic masculinity that says real men can't be raped, that they should have fought back, that admitting victimization is shameful and weak. Predators who are sophisticated, who plan their crimes, who think strategically, often specifically target victims they believe won't report. This is well documented in research. They assess vulnerability not just in terms of physical ability to resist, but in terms of social vulnerability. Who will be believed? Who will face barriers to reporting? Who will be too ashamed to come forward? If these allegations are true, Combs may have calculated that male victims would be less likely to come forward, less likely to be believed if they did, and less likely to receive public sympathy. He allegedly weaponized toxic masculinity itself, the societal shame that prevents men from admitting vulnerability or victimization. There's also a power dynamic specific to male-on-male assault in heterosexual contexts. It's not about sexual orientation, it's about domination and humiliation. Some predators specifically target straight men because the assault is an ultimate form of domination, a violation that attacks not just the body, but the victim's sense of masculinity and identity. Every single one of these lawsuits alleges the use of drugs to incapacitate victims. This isn't impulsive behavior. This is premeditation at its most calculated. Drug-facilitated sexual assault is one of the most calculated forms of predation. It requires planning, obtaining the drugs, finding opportunities to administer them without detection, ensuring privacy for the assault, and managing the aftermath. It's not a crime of passion or opportunity, it's methodical. The choice of drugs matters too. Substances like GHB, Rohypnol, or ketamine don't just sedate victims. They create a specific state where the person may be conscious but unable to move or resist. Some also cause amnesia, so victims may not remember the assault clearly, which makes reporting harder and creates reasonable doubt if cases go to trial. If these allegations are true, we're looking at someone who allegedly refined this method over years, possibly decades. Someone who learned what drugs work best, how to administer them without detection, how to manage victims afterward, and how to avoid consequences. One more psychological element we need to consider: escalation. Research on serial predators shows they often escalate over time, starting with less serious offenses and progressing to more serious ones as they gain confidence and refine their methods. If the 1997 allegation is true, and if the recent allegations are true, we're looking at a potential 28-year pattern. That's not escalation in the traditional sense. That's sustained predation over decades. That suggests someone who allegedly found a method that worked and continued using it because it was successful. These lawsuits don't exist in a vacuum. They're part of a larger reckoning in entertainment about how power enables abuse and how systems protect predators. For years, decades really, the entertainment industry operated on an unspoken rule. Don't cross the powerful, don't speak out, don't risk your career. Whisper networks existed where people warned each other about certain producers, certain executives, certain stars. But public accusations, career suicide. That silence allowed alleged predators to operate freely. Harvey Weinstein, R. Kelly, Bill Cosby. The pattern is consistent. Powerful men allegedly abusing for years while the industry looked away, while victims were paid off or intimidated into silence, while enablers facilitated and covered up. What's different now? Several factors. Social media gave victims a platform to speak directly to the public without going through industry gatekeepers. The Not Your Me Too movement created a cultural shift that made it slightly safer for victims to come forward. Legal changes in some states extended or eliminated statutes of limitations for sexual assault. And perhaps most importantly, there's been a shift in public willingness to believe victims and hold powerful people accountable. But notice I said slightly safer because these men still filed anonymously. They still feared retaliation. They still knew the risks of going public against someone with Combs' wealth and connections. And here's what's particularly disturbing. According to these lawsuits, some of this alleged abuse happened recently, 2022, 2023. This wasn't ancient history. This was allegedly happening while Combs was posting on Instagram about positivity and success, while he was being celebrated as a business icon, while he was mentoring young artists and entrepreneurs. That's the cognitive dissonance we have to grapple with. How can someone be both a successful businessman and an alleged serial predator? How can someone mentor young talent while allegedly abusing others? The answer is compartmentalization, the ability to separate different aspects of identity and behavior. Psychologists who study criminal behavior note that many offenders lead seemingly normal lives. They have jobs, families, community involvement. The abuse happens in separate contexts, hidden from public view. This isn't unusual. It's typical of predators who operate for extended periods without detection. Here's what frustrates me about how this story has been covered in mainstream media. The focus has been overwhelmingly on Cassie's lawsuit and the federal trafficking charges involving female victims. Those are important, those deserve attention, but the male victims have been largely ignored or treated as footnotes. Why? because we're still uncomfortable with the idea of male victims of sexual assault. We're still trapped in outdated ideas about masculinity that say men can't be violated, can't be vulnerable, can't be victims. The statistics tell a different story. According to the CDC, approximately 1 in 6 men experience sexual abuse or assault in their lifetime, but reporting rates are drastically lower than for female victims. The National Crime Victimization Survey found that men report sexual assault at less than half the rate women do, and male victims face unique barriers. They're more likely to be disbelieved, more likely to face mockery, more likely to have their sexuality questioned. These lawsuits force us to confront that discomfort. They force us to acknowledge that sexual abuse isn't about gender, it's about power. And men can be victimized just as brutally as women, especially when the predator has wealth, influence, and a system that protects them. The hip-hop community in particular needs to have this conversation. For decades, the culture has celebrated hypermasculinity, power, and dominance. Vulnerability is seen as weakness. Admitting victimization is seen as shameful. That cultural context makes it nearly impossible for men in hip-hop to come forward about sexual abuse. If these allegations are true, Combs allegedly exploited that exact cultural dynamic, knowing that his male victims would face enormous pressure to stay silent, to man up, to not be seen as weak or less than men. We need to expand our understanding of victimization beyond gender stereotypes. We need to create space for male victims to come forward without facing mockery or disbelief. We need to recognize that toxic masculinity doesn't just harm women, it harms men too, by trapping them in silence when they're victimized. Combs has broadly denied all allegations across these civil cases. His legal team, led by high-profile attorneys, has characterized the lawsuits as false, exaggerated, and financially motivated. They've argued that he will fight every claim in court and that the truth will ultimately vindicate him. His lawyers have specifically called Rodney Jones's allegations fabricated and pure fiction. They've suggested that multiple plaintiffs are coordinating to extort money from a wealthy celebrity, taking advantage of the current cultural climate where accusations alone can destroy reputations. This is a common and often effective defense strategy. Attack the credibility of accusers, suggest financial motivation, question timing, and force plaintiffs to prove their claims in court. In civil cases, the burden of proof falls on the plaintiffs. They have to prove their allegations are more likely true than not, a lower standard than criminal cases, but still a significant burden. Combs' legal team has also pointed out that he's never been criminally convicted of sexual assault, that these are civil claims seeking money, and that the American legal system presumes innocence. These are valid points. Allegations aren't proof, and everyone deserves due process. But here's what makes these cases different from typical he said situations. There are multiple accusers alleging similar patterns across different time periods with no apparent coordination. In legal terms, that's called pattern evidence, and it's powerful. Courts often allow evidence of similar acts to show a pattern of behavior, especially in sexual assault cases. If these cases go to trial, juries will hear from multiple men describing similar experiences. That's much harder to dismiss as coincidence or coordination than a single accuser's claims. So where do these cases go from here? Civil lawsuits move slowly, especially complex ones involving wealthy defendants with resources to fight aggressively. Discovery, the process where both sides exchange evidence, can take months or years. Depositions will be taken, where witnesses testify under oath. Documents will be subpoenaed. Text messages, emails, financial records, anything relevant to the claims. Expert witnesses will be hired to testify about psychological trauma, drug effects, industry practices. Combs' legal strategy appears to be fighting every claim aggressively, which is his right. He has the resources to drag these cases out, to make them expensive and exhausting for the plaintiffs, to file motions to dismiss, to challenge every piece of evidence. That's often how wealthy defendants operate. They use the legal system itself as a weapon, knowing that plaintiffs may run out of money or energy before reaching trial. But here's what's different in 2025. Public opinion matters in ways it didn't before. Even if Combs wins every civil case, even if he's never criminally convicted, the court of public opinion has already rendered a verdict. His business empire has crumbled. Major brands have severed ties. His reputation is destroyed, and these allegations will follow him forever. For the victims, both the ones who filed lawsuits and the ones who haven't come forward, the road ahead is brutal. Civil litigation is re-traumatizing. They'll have to relive their alleged assaults and depositions in court filings, potentially in public trials. They'll be cross-examined by aggressive defense attorneys whose job is to attack their credibility. Their motives will be questioned. Their past behavior will be scrutinized. Every inconsistency in their stories will be exploited, but they're doing it anyway. And that takes extraordinary courage. When you look at the whole picture, 5 separate lawsuits, multiple male victims, allegations spanning decades, a consistent pattern of drugging and assault, claims of blackmail and coercion, what emerges is deeply disturbing. These aren't random accusations. These aren't opportunistic money grabs. These are detailed, specific allegations from men who have everything to lose by coming forward. Men who knew they'd face disbelief, mockery, and questions about their sexuality. Men who knew their careers might suffer. Men who knew they'd be accused of lying for money. They came forward anyway. If these allegations are true, Sean Diddy Combs allegedly used his wealth, power, and influence to prey on vulnerable men for decades, knowing they'd likely never speak out. He allegedly drugged them, rendering them helpless. He allegedly assaulted them while they couldn't resist. And in some cases, he allegedly used recordings to blackmail them into silence and continued compliance. And he allegedly got away with it for years, maybe decades, because we as a society refuse to take male victims seriously, because toxic masculinity tells men they can't be victims, because the entertainment industry protects the powerful and silences the vulnerable. That's the real story here. Not just one man's alleged crimes, but the system that allegedly enabled them. The culture that made victims afraid to speak. The industry that looked the other way, the societal stigma that kept men silent even as they suffered. These lawsuits are allegations, not proven facts. Combs deserves his day in court. The American legal system is built on due process and the presumption of innocence, but these men also deserve to be heard. They deserve to be believed, and they deserve justice. At the end of the day, this case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, about masculinity, about who we believe and who we dismiss. It challenges us to expand our understanding of victimization beyond gender stereotypes. It demands that we create space for male victims to come forward without facing mockery or disbelief. Because if we've learned anything from the past decade of reckonings in entertainment, it's this: abuse thrives in silence. It thrives when victims are too afraid to speak, when society is too uncomfortable to listen, and when powerful people believe they're untouchable. These 5 men broke that silence. They spoke up knowing they'd be doubted, mocked, and attacked. They filed lawsuits knowing their lives would be turned upside down. They came forward knowing the odds were stacked against them. Whether you believe them or not, whether Combs is ultimately found liable or not, their courage in coming forward matters, because every victim who speaks up makes it slightly easier for the next one. Every lawsuit filed chips away at the wall of silence that protects predators. Every story told challenges the stigma that keeps victims trapped. The question now isn't just what happens to Diddy, it's what happens to the culture that allegedly enabled him. It's whether the entertainment industry will finally take male victims seriously. It's whether we as a society can move past outdated ideas about masculinity and vulnerability. These lawsuits are still ongoing. The legal process will take years. Settlements may happen, trials may occur, but the conversation they've started about power, about abuse, about who deserves to be believed, that conversation is just beginning. And it's a conversation we desperately need to have. What do you think? Do these allegations reveal a pattern of predation, or are they coordinated attacks on a wealthy celebrity? How should the entertainment industry respond to male victims of sexual assault? Drop your thoughts in the comments, but keep it respectful. These are real people with real trauma. If this video opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered before, hit that like button and subscribe. We're going to keep covering the stories that mainstream media ignores, the uncomfortable truths that need to be told. And if you or someone you know is a male survivor of sexual assault, know this: you're not alone. Your story matters. You deserve support. Resources are in the description, including RAIN's hotline and organizations specifically supporting male survivors. Thanks for watching. Stay informed, stay critical, and never stop asking questions.